Hello, hello, everyone. How are you?
Hello, everybody.
So, welcome to Dip in Time and Sparkle Sanctuary. We are very happy to be here today. This is our monthly mental health musing for October 2024, and we have a really good topic today. What do you think, Rebecca?
I think it's a good topic, and it really goes well with the conversation that we had last month. So it's a good segue, and it's more informative. I think there were some questions that were posed in comments about narcissism and things like that. So it's a really good segue for this.
Right, because last time we talked, we were coming up with like certain terms. And I think that kind of brought us into what exactly are these terms and how are they used?
Yes.
So now I noticed watching TV, and I think people they hear certain terms, they like the terms because it's something new, and they just kind of go with it without really understanding the term and how it, I don't know, it should be used, could be used, may be used. Um,
Um, I think part of it is not knowing the full spectrum of what that term means.
Good point.
And part of it is like a misunderstanding of what it means, and it's an oversimplification.
Ooh, that's a good way of putting it. Oversimplification. You
Yeah.
know, I, I think when I think of the oversimplification is part of you hear a new term and then it's like, ooh, I know what that term is, and I'm going to start using it. It kind of becomes like, for me, a generational kind of slang where it's like, ooh, um,
The key buzzwords.
buzzwords. Yes, thank you. So I was happening to watch a show just last week. I was watching on a replay, and it was interesting. So it was American Idol, not American Idol, America's Got Talent, and they were talking to a group and how they or what they thought of what one of the judges said. And sometimes judges have different opinions and they say certain things, and it may not feel nice to hear them. Um, the group, the choreography actually said, I got PTSD from it and I had to work through it. And I know as an individual who has PTSD, that kind of threw me for a loop. Hearing someone just kind of go, oh, I saw this and oh, I have PTSD from it or I have trauma from it. And while it may have been very difficult and shocking, it's a different, how would you phrase that, Rebecca?
So there's a difference between a momentary upset to your existence in the moment versus what true trauma is.
And how would you
You know,
define true trauma versus like, okay, so I I I had somebody come around the corner and really scare me as a practical joke, and I was like traumatized versus I saw a horrific crash and my world just kind of narrowed and I couldn't think.
well, because and that's a good question. I think part of it is like the person that comes around the corner and spooks you. If you had not been in like the mindset that you were in that moment, would it have been upsetting? If you were in a playful mood or you were joking, would you have found it funny? Would you have found it agreeable, right?
Mm,
Versus like an accident, like what you were just talking about, does it give you nightmares? Does it keep you awake? Does it cause you to be fearful? Does it make your skin crawl? Do you have a physical primal response to it? I mean, because, okay, so there was a time when I was little that I just scared the holy bejesus out of my mom, right? Okay.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to give too much information because I don't want to, it was a funny thing and I was trying to be funny. But in that moment, I really scared her. And it took her a minute, but she eventually laughed because she realized the absurdity and the silliness in it. So there's a difference between that and the other, like there's, and it is hard to explain, but I think there's also, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and I hope I don't upset anybody, but I think that we've become a very sensitive society.
Right.
I feel like everybody feels like nothing can be said to them and nothing can be done to them without it being traumatic, or I think people just kind of over respond. I don't know. Because I know there was a lot of stuff that happened in my childhood, and I'm not saying I want every child to have horrible things happen to them or to even have to endure even a little bit like bullies in school,
Yeah.
I don't think people should be bullied. However, I also know that sometimes kids will come to me in the school that I work in and they'll tell me they're being bullied. And honestly, when I get to the root of it, it's because they were told no.
Right.
And I have to remind them that no is a complete sentence.
That is correct. And it's interesting because as you're saying that, this can happen anytime, anywhere, and it could be taken and interpreted differently. So I
Yes.
know even in sports, like when you are working with a team and you have kids 13, 14, and they are playing a game, not the sport that they're just playing a game in free time, and they get carried away with kind of talking to each other. And you know how sometimes kids they kind of rally each other up, and
Mm-hmm.
then something gets said and somebody interprets it completely different, and then it's like, I'm done. And in fact, this actually happened, and the kid, the one player, actually went to their mom, and they left the tournament. And the coaches had no clue what was going on, and they're just like. And then when it finally came about, they were rubbing each other or ribbing each other, and you know, things got out of hand. And it's like, okay, but this is a time where we need to have a conversation and try and understand what was going on and how people interpreted it without making like blowing things up.
Yes. And I think that's exactly it. I think that things get really blown up that don't necessarily need to be because everybody's just hypersensitive to stuff.
Yeah.
I've always been, when I was little, people used to call me sensitive, and so I get it. Like I was a crier when I was little, but I have kind of hardened over time, and I think I hardened over time because I wasn't allowed to just be super sensitive. And and that's through the not, that's through over time, like a variety of people,
Yeah.
mostly my ex-husband, but you know, that's something that, and I would never ever wish anybody to have to go through the things that I went through, but I can look back and go, okay, yeah, I can see where I was kind of being a baby about that. Or I can see
Or
why
if
people would
take
say,
it personally,
yeah,
right?
I
You
could
felt
see
like
why
it was
people would
personal.
say, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say sometimes it can feel like a personal attack, and you get wrapped up in your emotions that you're not thinking. You can't think physiologically.
Yes.
You can't think.
Yes. And that's true. That's true. But I feel like we're kind of in a point in society where like a lot of kids I'd say a lot of kids in a specific age group, I would say 44 and up, grew up in a time frame where we were latchkey kids, right? And we didn't have our parents around and whatever. And so we all had to deal with a lot of stuff at a very young age. And as parents, like then the next generation, as parents really didn't want their kids, they were like, oh, well, no child should be treated like that. So we're going to do this differently. And I
Yeah.
think the pendulum has swung the other direction too far.
And that is true, because that happens with every generation.
Yes.
Right? You look at how your parents grew up, and you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to change that and do this. Right? And I think as a society, because we are now parents or older individuals, we're also trying to be informed.
Yes.
But sometimes Google is not the right avenue. Or
No.
talking to a person who heard something, or they have a little bit of information, or they think they have the information, but they're not qualified. They are not educated in that field. So there's a
Yes.
difference, right? Because as a latchkey kid, we learned to be self-sufficient. We
Yes.
found the answers that we needed because we didn't know where else to go to, because we weren't going to get it. And now we have Google. So I have a boo-boo. I'm going to Google this and see if I'm okay.
Right.
Right. So we get used to these terms, but we don't fully understand these terms. So in that example I was saying about PTSD, it's, well, yes, it was shocking and you didn't want to hear it. You're okay. You survived.
Right.
You know you survived. You know you were able to go back to your logical brain and rationalize it.
Well, and at no point were you actually under any threat.
Right.
You know, and I think that's another big thing.
Yes. So I think that's a really good segue into when we were using a term, narcissism, last month. Now, I know a lot of people talk about narcissistic. Oh, you're being narcissistic, or you're like, okay, but what exactly does that mean? Now,
yes, because most people think of narcissistic as people and as someone who is self-centered, and it's so much more than that.
Right. So before we get into this, I would just like to remind everybody that we are not medically trained individuals. This is personal experience and our understanding and the background that we come from, being in with like psychology, but we're not psychiatrists or anything like that.
Yes, we are not here to label anybody, diagnose anybody. We're not here to tell you that, you know, like, please don't take from this. If you have a partner or you have a family member and you think that they may be one, you know, part of one of these terms, please do not say that we said that that was what they were, because that's not what
No.
we're saying. We're just saying, here's our general knowledge of what this means based on our experiences, my encounters with therapists, my knowledge in the research that I've done, the same for Rhonda, and how we perceive these words are being overused enough in society currently that it actually demeans what we know about these terms, and it makes it so it almost invalidates people who actually go through these experiences.
Right, because I think part of when I see it, it's like when you start labeling everything, they're not all the same. Like narcissism itself is not just one type. There's many types of narcissism.
Yes.
All right. And just to go around and do a blanket cover of it's all narcissistic, in what way? How do you know that? Why do you say that?
Or, you know, just observing somebody and saying they're selfish and then calling them narcissistic doesn't actually mean that that's what they are.
No. And to be so from a personal perspective, as an individual who has a hard time allowing myself to do self-care, buy myself something, or stand up for myself, ask for something, to be called narcissistic really quite does the opposite.
It's yes. Okay, so I have somebody in my past who I, after therapy, have discovered that they are probably not diagnosed. I can't say 100% for sure, but a therapist is guessing based on knowledge that individual is narcissistic. Okay. When I had several years ago, I had a friend, and I had a falling out because of a misunderstanding, that they would not allow me to explain what was actually happening. When that happened, I was called a narcissist. And I was like, what? It was so, the idea that I could be compared to somebody so similar as the person that was in my past, it was devastating. It honestly put me in a really bad headspace. And because I've always been that person that's like, well, am I the problem? Is it me? Did I do this wrong? Should I have done this differently? Maybe, whatever. And I think a lot of people who have dealt with somebody who is a narcissist actually will start to go, am I narcissistic? Did I do this wrong? And the thing is if you're questioning it, then you're probably not. And that's actually what my therapist had to tell me, because I went into her and said, is this something that I'm doing? Am I the problem with this? And after sitting down and talking to her, it was just a projection of them and the things they were doing that made me feel that way. And so to have somebody actually say that to me, it set me back. It set me back a lot, and it was incredibly difficult. And so then when that person realized they made a mistake and wanted to be my friend again, I couldn't step back into that space.
No. And that
I
would make
couldn't.
total sense, because not only is that invalidating, it's triggering. It just changes everything. And
It
you
does.
start second guessing and, okay, well, what did I do wrong?
Mm-hmm.
I should have done this. I should have done that. Or, oh, and you're trying to, I find, and I'm only speaking from my own experience, I would go in and I would become the doormat, and I would be apologizing for everything,
Mm-hmm.
even for stuff that wasn't mine to apologize. And I'm
Uh-huh.
to fix things. And you're absolutely right. I'm worthless. I shouldn't have said that, so you got angry, or I am completely wrong. And you start belittling yourself. And after a while, you start believing it because you keep saying it.
Yes. And because it's not just them that says it, then you say it too. And then you're like, well, I've already accepted this fate. Yes. And honestly, you said another word that's triggering. That word is also another buzzword that's overused.
Use that one.
Kids, especially right now, I work in an elementary school, and those kids are always like, don't say that. That's so triggering.
Oh, yes. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because I'm like, you're right. Don't trigger me. Oh,
Yep.
that triggered me. Oh, I don't like that. That triggered me.
Yeah.
Oh,
And they
I
use
don't
it as a
really like-
justification for behaviors.
Yes. And that might be another topic we have a conversation about, is triggers. Because I know for me, I when I first became aware of the word trigger, that was the only word I could use to try and describe anything and everything.
And actually, that would be a really good topic for us to have in another video. Yes, because triggers can be so many different things. I think it would be a really good idea to dive into that and how we can help each other be a little bit more sensitive. If somebody, says that this, like if somebody behaves very oddly based on something that you do,
Yeah.
and you have no idea why, it could just be that it was a trigger. So that's a really good idea for a future video. Really good idea. We can definitely dive into that some more. So
I've
let's
got
go
my
back to
pencil,
narcissism.
and I'm writing it down.
Oh,
And we're going back to
perfect,
narcissism.
perfect.
Haha. Okay, done. Okay. So,
Okay, so what do you know is because there's a definition, a specific definition for narcissism out there, but what would you say it is?
narcissism, they are self-involved. The world evolves around them. They are entitled. They are very competitive, combative. They are always right. You're wrong. They don't see your side of things. They don't understand. So I would say that's part of like the empathy, like lack of empathy.
Yes, they lack empathy. They also everything has to be for a show. So like they don't do anything for any purpose, really, unless other people are around to see it.
Yes.
Because they have to
And
look good to everybody.
yes. And when you say look good, they have to look like they're on their game. They know
Yep.
everything. There's nothing wrong. So you may have a person who almost like a Jekyll and Hyde. For me, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde.
And that's exactly what I called it too, Jekyll and Hyde.
Like only you see certain pieces of it, and when you try and talk about it, they're like, no. And you talk to other people about it, and it's like, no, I don't see what you see. And you're like, that's
No,
what
because
I'm doing.
they can't see it because that person is so charming when they're around because they've put on a show. It's a mask. And that's really ultimately what it is. I think the best way to describe narcissism is a mask. It is a way of putting a persona out into the world that makes everybody think that they are charming and giving and wonderful. Like they're like the kind of person that you'd want to have in your corner every day of the week. And
Oh,
like and you think, they do something that's called love bombing. That's a key term for narcissism, where they will just make you feel like you are the most important person in the world. They'll make you feel more loved than you ever imagined feeling loved before. They will shower you with gifts. They will take you places you've never been. They will just completely overwhelm you. I remember saying my person was my knight in shining armor. He was Prince
yeah.
Charming. He came to sweep me off my feet, and he did sweep me off my feet.
Yep.
But little did I know that only lasted for a little while.
Right. And it's not that they're not capable of doing it, it's more of a manipulation.
It is absolute manipulation. They're only doing it to win you over so that they can, because it is a mask. They're doing it to win you over so that when their mask falls, you're already in love.
Yes. You're blinded by love.
Yep. And that's why it's called love bombing. They throw everything at you so that by the time you actually see them for who they are, you're already in too deep.
Yep. And it also gets to the point where when you try and get the courage to change things, it's really hard. And then people are like, well, why don't, no, that can't be right because no, that person doesn't do that. Or, well, what, just leave them. Well, it's not that easy.
Well, when you think about it, if you are getting swept off your feet and you're being love bombed, what are you telling everybody about that person?
Yes.
You're telling everybody,
reinforcing.
yes, You're telling everybody they're the most amazing human being I've ever met. I can't believe I'm so lucky. I never deserved anybody like this before. I could never have imagined myself being with somebody like this. I feel so blessed and I feel so inferior and I feel like I'm not good enough. And then guess what happens? The second their mask slips, they start saying those things and reinforcing it, not just to you, but to the people around you.
Yes.
And since you started that, must be true.
Yes. And it's very interesting because they can switch on a dime from what I've seen.
Absolutely.
Where
Yes.
they could be ripping you a new a-hole, excuse the French, but somebody comes to the door. Well, hello there. How are you? No problems. Come on in. Meanwhile, you're over in the corner shivering, and they're like, "What's wrong there?" "Oh, yeah, she's not feeling very well, or he's not feeling very well, or they're not feeling very well. You know, they're coming down with something."
They're having an issue, and I'm not sure exactly what's going on. I think she's upset about something, but she started it. I'm just trying to make her happy.
Okay, when you just said that, my whole skin just crawled. I like, oh. And of course, the mama bear in me is like, right, Rhonda?
You know what that is?
We're having a conversation.
There's a term for that.
What is the term?
Gaslighting.
Oh.
Because gaslighting doesn't just happen to the person, it happens to everyone around them. There is a really old black and white movie, and it's called Gaslighting. And that's actually where the term came from. And basically, this movie is, and I watched it, and I tell you, when I watched this movie, I cried. I bawled. This woman falls in love, and they buy a house, and it's back in the old days when the light was all gas burners. And that's where the guy that she fell in love with started telling people she's upset again. I don't know what's happening. He started doing things like he put something in her purse or he moved something in the house and he told the maid that he didn't touch it, that she must have touched it, and then he put it in her stuff so that the maid found it in her stuff. And he was like, "You must have moved it. You're going crazy. There's something wrong with you. I don't understand." So he didn't just make her feel crazy through his actions, but he convinced everybody around her that she was crazy. And then they started talking in those terms. Yeah. So she felt isolated and alone. If you have the opportunity, and I don't just mean you, Rhonda, I mean anybody that's watching this. If you have the opportunity to go and find that movie, I recommend Google searching it. I don't know. I don't remember. I think I was able to watch it on YouTube many years ago. But if you have the ability to watch that movie, it is a perfect example of exactly what gaslighting is and how narcissists can use other people and themselves in your circle to make you feel like you are legitimately insane.
Well, and I mean, I think you make a really good point, and if I can highlight it, is when someone starts playing, manipulating things, and telling other people, when you see stuff, you start thinking and you start seeing what you were told.
Yes.
I got a new car. Oh, look, there's so many of those cars around on the road. Just because it's a familiarity thing, you see it because it's been identified.
Yes.
So they start, oh, well, that's been moved too. Even though they haven't moved it, no one's moved it. It's been in the same spot. But now you're starting to see things differently.
Yes. So I can give an example. I can give an example of, because I think this is a good one to kind of talk about gaslighting. So my previous relationship, the situation that I've spoken about, that person was identified as probably narcissistic. I would go grocery shopping with them. I would be in a really good mood, and we would be walking around, and he would say things to me, not loudly, not where anybody else could hear, but when we would be walking, he'd kind of pull me aside and say things, make little comments. And it was a little comment here, a little comment there, over and over again as we're shopping, until finally he would say something that was so upsetting that I would blow up.
Yep.
I would say, stop talking to me like that. Obviously I'm not going to whisper it, because I've asked already in a whispered tone, please don't do that. You're upsetting me. Please stop, because that doesn't work. And finally, at some point, I lost my cool and I said, I asked you to stop. Enough.
Yeah.
And you know what happened?
Everyone
he pulled me aside.
You.
Everybody around me stopped, and he grabbed my arm and said, how dare you make a scene in front of everybody? Look at you. You're freaking crazy.
Okay. My hair just went up again on that one. Yep.
So that is gaslighting, and that is a narcissist. They're doing everything they can in front of everybody else to look as good as possible while making you look as bad as possible.
Yes. Now, there's different types of narcissism as well.
Yes.
Right? So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there are two main types, but there are, like, I think if you Google, it's like 5 different
subtypes.
types.
Yeah.
There's subtypes. So there's the overt, and then there's the covert.
Yes.
Right? Now, do you want to talk about a little bit of the difference between those two? Would you feel comfortable with that?
I'm actually, this is so bad, because I know what you're talking about,
Yes.
but my brain completely shut down in a moment, because my brain goes to, I guess, because my brain goes to, there's the violent kind, and then there's the non-violent kind. And those are actually more like the subcategories. And so, I'll let you go ahead and just, it'll help refresh my brain.
Oh, no worries. And
actually, you know what? It's 39. This would be a really good point for us to pause.
Oh, yeah. This would be a really good spot to, so what we thought we would do, because we have 2 different channels, is we kind of split the videos up. So you kind of go to both people, if that's okay. So at this point, we're going to go to another channel.
We'll let the first part be on your channel, and we'll do the second part on mine.
Thank you. No, because I'm like,
so
sorry.
If you, so after we say goodbye here, head over to my channel, watch the second half of this. We'll continue this discussion. We'll explain what we were talking about. And and then hopefully you'll see, and if you're watching this is part 1. So good job. And
and let us know in the comments, what are your thoughts? Like, are you familiar with this? Have you seen, or you think you've seen something like this, or experienced something like this? Because you're not alone. You're definitely not alone.
Honestly, there 1 in 8 people, or 1 in 7 people, something like that, statistics say, have some kind of personality disorder, and narcissists fall under those personality disorders. So the likelihood of you getting out through this life unscathed from somebody with a personality disorder is actually really low. So it's okay if you've experienced one. It's okay if you've had one meet you in your life, and know 2 things. 1, this is not you. This is them.
No.
And 2, again, this is not abnormal for you to have experienced, because there's so many of them in the world. So do not feel like you did anything wrong because you came across somebody like this. In fact, people who are narcissistic prey on empaths, people who have feelings, people who have emotions, people who care. So just know that if you have been a victim of somebody who has narcissism, that means that you're a good person.
That's a very good
And they
point.
took advantage of that.
Yeah. That is a very good point. And I'm really glad you brought that up. And sometimes they'll see like, no, I'm just an A type personality, which is another kind of term that kind of thrown around as an A type personality, because they're not all like that.
Yeah.
So catch part 2 of this conversation over on Sparkle Sanctuary, where we are going to start talking about the different types of narcissism there is. We'll see you over there.
All right. Bye.
Bye.